Tune in to UFO Undercover, Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern, with your host, Joe Montaldo, right here on the Paranormal Radio Network.
What's out there? What creates the shadows in the corners or the creatures of the dark? Who are those on the other side? What do they have to say? This is the Gateway Podcast. This is not your normal style of paranormal talk radio. Brought to you live from United Public Radio Network, 107.7 FM New Orleans.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Gateway, broadcasting from the edge of the Mojave, where the strange slips into the cracks. We are live on United Public Radio Network, 107.7 FM New Orleans, and I'm your host this evening, C.L. Thomas. How you guys doing out there? As you can see, somebody deleted my intro to my show, so if it looks a little different, I'm sorry. I kind of dug up an old one for you guys just for tonight, but I'll re-upload that for features. My friend and author, Dacre Stoker, the great-grandnephew of Bram Stoker, and a New York Times international bestseller and co-author of Dracula the Un-Dead from 2009 and Dracul from 2018, is here to talk about Dracula in my favorite place in the whole world, Romania. I can't wait to get into this topic. But before we get into our guest, you have been listening to the wonderful host, Sean Callie, on Into the Night. I want to especially thank Joe Montaldo and all of those at United Public Radio Network for making this show possible. Without those guys, the show wouldn't be possible. It's currently 113 degrees here in the Mojave. That's right, 113. We are actually in a heat warning here in Las Vegas Valley. My house, though, is a little bit up in the hills. I'm around 15 to 2,000 feet, so my thermostat is only reading at 109 today. But throughout the valley, it's 113. It seems like every Tuesday I have just gotten back from a trip someplace, especially lately. And the same is true for today. I just got back from the wonderful city of Denver. I didn't have a lot of time this time to do a whole lot, but I used to have some friends that lived in Denver, so I've done just about all there is to do in that city. I've hiked Pikes Peak. I did the incline. I've done so many things. I've seen so many things. I saw Garden of the Gods, explored a lot of Native American artifacts, the whole deal. But I did do something that I haven't done. I visited the Molly Brown house, which I completely forgot that she even lived there. So I got to do like a little mediumship walkthrough one morning before they opened the museum and house up to the public. And I got to tell you, that house, there's a lot going on in that house. I just didn't expect it. For those who don't know, Molly Brown, aka the Unsinkable Molly, she was a wealthy socialite dubbed New Money during the turn of the century when her husband struck gold by chance. It was an accident. He funded a mine in Leadville, Colorado, I believe. Somebody talked him into investing in this mine, and it actually struck gold. So they became rich just like overnight. Molly and her husband built this gorgeous house out in Denver, it's right outside the Colorado state capital. It was really neat walking around there. They still had a lot of the artifacts that the family owned, and wow, there's just a lot going on in this house. It really gave me some insight into the topic of the Titanic that I haven't really thought about before. That's my one main carry away from that whole situation. But anyhow, That could be an entire show on its own, which I need to do sometime just because I'm not very good at being my own guest, and I need to get better at that. So I'm going to plan on being solo here at some point, like Sean does, and just do a show without a guest. But another thing I did this week is I pulled all my Halloween stuff out and began decorating. It's just something about seeing the stuff in the stores. As soon as it pops up, it never fails. I have to get my spooky stuff out and take inventory of what I have. So I'm not buying stuff from the stores, right? It's hot outside, but we are going to make it a spooky season kind of night. So let me get some ambiance going here. Lock your doors and get settled in for tonight. Let me see if I can find some nighttime music for you all. There we go. Got some crickets going. So my guest tonight, Dacre, joins me in Dracula Files in Romania. Dacre, welcome to the show.
Hey, how are you? It's a whole lot hotter where you are, but I'm in South Carolina. It's not quite 113, but I'm ready for a little chill. I'm ready for the autumn chill myself, so I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's been hot. It feels like we're in a conventional oven right now.
Yeah.
It's the best way to describe it. It's like even when a wind blows, it just feels like you're
Can't get away from it. Yeah.
Yeah. And even at nighttime, when that sun goes down, you know how it cools down around the rest of the country? Well, it stopped doing that now.
Not so much with you. Well, let's get chill tonight. Let's get spooky and talk Dracula and paranormal and Romania and all that cool stuff. That doesn't chill people. I don't know what will.
Yeah, I don't know either, especially Romania. What's the weather like over there? Do you know?
Well, you got to, first of all, you've traveled there. I've traveled there. If anybody listening, as a traveler, you always look at the map and figure what's the, where the long lines of longitude and latitude. Well, it's pretty far south. I mean, it's beyond Greece. It's right next to the Black Sea, next to Turkey. So it's pretty darn hot there at this time of the year. And I have been there in July, and I will probably not go back in July. I like to go in May and June. And then I also like to go back in September and early October, late October as well. It's a lovely country. The colors change, sort of like Canada, northern U.S. But with all due respect, they are, they're an emerging country. So there's not a lot of hotels in rural areas that have AC. Yes, they do in the big cities, yeah. But when you're out in the middle of nowhere, these really cool bed and breakfasts, and those are the places to go to. The places with the real vibe. It's windows and fans. So that's why it's a little bit easier to avoid the really steamy parts of July and August.
No, I think I went there in November, right before Thanksgiving, and it was already snowing, but I loved it because when you get up into the Transylvanian mountains, that heavy fog was there during sundown and sunup, and it just really brought that ambience.
It's true, and I think mountains do that. I mean, you were just talking about Denver. I'm up near the Southern Appalachians. I spend time in Western Canada because I'm an avid fly fisherman in the Rockies. When I go to Europe, it's like, you got to realize you have Italy and Switzerland and Austria, the Alps, but the Carpathians are just as impressive and dominate the country in this massive sort of U shape. So, we're driving up through the mountains to get from one place to another, but it dominates, the weather patterns. It does wonderful things because you've got a lot of rainfall that on both sides of the mountains. You have a great irrigation. So therefore, the farms are fertile. They got lots of water. So the food is incredible. And the scenery and the mist and the fog rising, the sunsets. Oh, my gosh. It's fantastic. And it does get pretty darn cool up in those mountains,
Yeah, it was very cold.
Yeah.
So I think I remember I had to go buy some clothes because I was that cold. So to start us off, I have a really, I don't know if it's a personal question. Maybe, I don't know. What was the moment like when you first realized that you were the great grandnephew of Bram Stoker? And maybe people out there don't even know who Bram Stoker is. Did you grow up knowing about this famous family connection, or was it a discovery that came later?
Well, yeah. So first off, if you've been living under a rock or you don't read horror, Bram Stoker wrote Dracula in 1897. He was the theater manager. He's from Ireland, but he was living in London at the time. So he was one of 7 children. Of those 7, his youngest brother, who's my great-grandfather, had a son that moved to Canada after World War I, and that's how our branch of the family started. Bram actually had a son. That son had a daughter. So there are some living direct descendants, but their name's not Stoker. And then only one other of the 7 kids actually had offspring, but none of the branches living today, which is kind of unusual to have that many, children, a family, and only 3 having offspring, 2 active to this day. So did I know much about it? No, not really, because we were sort of the Canadian Stokers, and around Halloween, people would joke and josh you about, what are you going to do, take our blood or bite us? But Crystal, really, I became aware of it, back in sort of the early 70s when I was a young teenager. But it didn't dawn on me, really, the impact that he had on literature and mostly on popular culture. So that was not until I started watching the movies. I was later on in high school, then in college. And I remember the first film I watched, The Fearless Vampire Hunters. There was the credit, based lightly on Bram Stoker's Dracula. And all my friends in high school started, kind of giving me good noogies, like as they would. And it's like, oh my gosh, that's pretty big. His name's on the movie screen. And then I got into college and I started reading it in an English literature class, reading Dracula. I was like, oh my God, people really take this stuff seriously. But it wasn't until I read the first sort of biography and a study by McNally and Florescu, In Search of Dracula, that it was, hey Jim, hey, I'm glad he's joined us. He's been a great promoter of us. Thank you. He's another fellow vampire writer. So, it was when I got to see through these authors, not family members, that were really into Bram and start doing all this writing about them and turning some of his thoughts, getting inspired by his book and turning it into many different versions of movies, at the age of sort of 17, 18, 19. That's when it really dawned on me, Crystal. And then the next big step was when I got into it myself, doing my research and started writing, and people would come up to me and said, that book that Bram Stoker wrote, that really changed me. That really had an impact. I read it about every 2 years. And now it got serious, Crystal, because people, I mean, in a good way, it's like, it's not just, it's pretty cool. He started, vampires and popular culture, and look what Lugosi did with it, and Christopher Lee and Frank Langella and all. But people really get into this and count and take very seriously. When's the next Dracula movie coming out? Oh, that was good. That sucked. No, that was good. When's the next series coming out? What do they think about, Fred Saberhagen? What do they think about Anne Rice, Stephen King? They really, sort of look at Bram as the guy creating the alpha book, and everything else from there, is sort of extra dressing and comes from branches from that. Even though I will say, before I take a pause here for you, he didn't invent the vampire. This was an already going myth in the Middle Ages. He didn't invent, the vampire in literature even. There had been books written by Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu, J. Malcolm Reimer, John Polidori. But what Bram did so well is he packaged Dracula in a way that it was identifiable. He brought him to England, the sort of the reverse colonization thing going on. And he did it at a time when the occult was on the rise in Victorian era. So the paranormal investigators of today, that's where it all started, and it started, spiritualism was going on in the US, it came to England, and Bram just happened to, either lightning in a bottle or well thought out plans, he put it all together when people were thinking about the afterlife, what goes on afterwards. And now we present somebody out of the vampire myth, appearing on the shores of Whitby.
Bram Stoker, he was into seances and things like that, wasn't he?
Yeah, and people don't get that. I mean, look, there was a side of people in the Victorian area that you have to kind of stay very conservative. He was the theater manager, he did his thing. He managed the most famous actor of his time, Henry Irving, very upstanding. Bram had been a head of the Philosophical Society, head of the Historical Society at Trinity. He was a big-time athlete. He was a civil servant. He actually was promoted to be the inspector of clerks of petty sessions all over Ireland. That's an important legal position. But he was also a curious mind. He was very open-minded, and he was thoughtful. And I believe, being a friend of Arthur Conan Doyle, being a friend of Pamela Coleman Smith, the first artist that drew the Smith Waite tarot cards, no mistakes there. He was thoughtful about what goes on in the afterlife. He was thinking of religion, and there's more to what we're being told of every Sunday. There's more than that from the pulpit. There's more. There's more beyond what we know as death. And he, I honestly believe he had some sort of thoughts himself about belief in second sight. And he wrote about that in one of his books, The Mystery of the Sea, a whole chapter on second sight. I even found newspaper articles where he was listened to by an author in front of a large group of people at a reception for Irving, that Bram Stoker himself talked about 2 separate incidences that he, witnessed a second sight. Let me tell you one of them, just to give you an idea. So this was in the Dundee, Scotland newspaper. It was 1830. Bram died in 1930, but Bram died in 1912. But the author decided to wait that long to write about it, this journalist.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And he himself said that the great Bram Stoker was sitting down with his pipe in front of the fire and was talking about when he visited Cruden Bay, then called Port Erroll. So Port Erroll is just north of Aberdeen, and that's where Bram went for 11 summers, spent his retreat there. This was his writer's retreat. Like, you go to the mountains to find yourself, and I go to the mountains to do my fishing and think of my stories. He went to Cruden Bay. There was interesting, and I've been there a number of times. I've met a guy called Mike Shepard who really knows his stuff and has written about Bram there, that he'd go to church on Sundays, as everybody would, but the fishermen would practice pagan rituals the moment they would step onto their boat and start going out to the ocean and making sure that they were doing all the right superstition things to make sure they were safe. So there was this push me, pull you thing between organized religion and pagan rituals. And what Bram was doing there, I believe, was connecting with what we later called pantheism, which is sort of this belief in everything works, all religions work, and the greatest god of all is Mother Earth. And when I'm in Cruden Bay, Scotland, I feel the same way when I see the massive sky, the ocean, the earth. At low tide, you see under the ocean, 20-foot drop. You see all these rocks. You see places where ships have crashed and people have died, really horrible deaths. But this is where Bram met the Earl of Erroll, who was the Earl and lived in Slains Castle. Slains Castle, you guys can Google it, is now a ruin, but at the time it was not. But it was the place that Bram visited the Earl more than once, and it's the place that Bram Stoker modeled the inside of his Castle Dracula. So when Jonathan Harker arrives in chapter 2 and he walks into the castle, he walks in through a door with no knocker, goes in through a hall, enters another room, goes into an octagonal room lit by a single lamp with no windows to the outside. That's the exact description of Slains Castle. So back to my story. It is the Earl that invited Bram and others on a pheasant shoot. So they're out in the fields, in the moors with the gun loaders, walking along. The dogs find a pheasant, they'll point, wait, scare the birds, and shoot, boom. And so Bram is having a chat with his gilly, with his guide. And he says, well, how's the Earl doing? Well, he said, he's not doing so well. He says, the veil is getting high. And if you don't know what that means, the veil is what they pull over your body when you're dead. So he's saying he's in ill health. And Bram says, don't be silly. Don't be silly at all. He's looking fine. He goes, no, you see. So the summer holiday passes. The Earl doesn't die. Bram goes home. He comes back the next year. And he's invited on another pheasant shoot. And so on the next pheasant shoot, he asks for the same gilly. And he goes, you were wrong, young man. He goes, oh, no. the veil is much higher now. And you go, oh, come on, you're silly. You made a mistake. No, not at all. You see, 2 days later, the Earl died of a brain aneurysm. Totally undiagnosed. Back in those days, they wouldn't have diagnosed. In these days, you can't diagnose. So what this Gilly had seen was this coming on in whatever sensory perception he had, and told that to Bram. Bram regaled that to the newspaper writer, and it was in the Dundee paper. So I think Bram believes in that. And second of all, he wrote a review of a book in New Zealand by a guy called McRae, who was writing about second sight in the islands and highlands of northern Scotland. And the review was all these things, similar stories, and Bram was not putting it down. He was supporting it. So not only did Bram experience a couple things himself, he wrote a positive review about it, and he wrote it as the first chapter of Mystery of the Sea. Now, if any of you want to find that book, go to bramstoker.org. It's a free website. You can read all of Bram's public domain works, and you'll see what I mean. It's called The Seer. So it's long-winded, Crystal, but that is really what Bram is all about. Is he's an open-minded guy. When he starts writing his stories, he inserts things that he believes himself. He does a tremendous amount of research in different places, which we'll get to later, to bring in topics that are, let's just say trigger points. No sensitivities with his readers.
Well, it's interesting that in his works that this came up, because is there any correlation between the Romanian people, even though he's never been to Romania, because the Romanian people are very, what's the word?
Superstitious, folklore.
Superstitious, yes. And they believe in the Strigoi, which has been a long time.
Yeah.
That's been going on for centuries, right?
So I'm glad you asked that, and I'll kind of keep this short. He never went there, but luckily Emily Gerard, a Scottish author, did, and Bram read about it. He read about an article that she wrote called Transylvanian Superstitions. She was someone like you, Crystal, who loves to travel. She got married to a guy who was a cavalry officer living in northern Transylvania, Sibiu. And from there, he's off doing his military stuff. And so she's off wandering around, checking the place out. And her passion is folklore, superstition, myth, and so on. And this is back in the mid 1800s. So she's a maverick to go around with her notepad and interviewing people in the middle of nowhere and getting them to extracting from them. And probably she was talking to religious people, probably shaman, probably village elders, probably the other learned people, which were military medical folks, who were some of the best educated that would go out and see all these weird superstitions as people, these strange rituals, when people were dead and dying. So this thing she wrote, Transylvanian Superstitions, Bram actually had concise notes in his notes about that. And then the book she wrote, when she expanded it to 2 volumes, Transylvanian Superstitions in Land Beyond the Forest, he quoted directly just what you said, Strigoi, Nosferatu, all these other things that are commonplace back in those days. And as you very well know, Crystal, to this day as well, in rural, isolated places, those beliefs still prevail in Romania. Yes. And it's not so much naivete. It's just that they're very grounded people. And there's a lot of religion floating around. And so people, kind of do what they want. They take bits and pieces of beliefs. Now, when they're in cities where there's more social pressure, they may conform to one religion or another. But in rural areas, it's mostly what really rules people is their belief system, Mother Nature, superstitions, and folklore. And that's what Bram connected with. And believe me, very complex mourning rituals, passages of life to the other life or life after death is very complex. And so he picked up on that and moved his story that was going to be set in Austria to Transylvania. He actually moved Vlad the Impaler from Wallachia, a province, to Transylvania because of all this stuff in Transylvania. So it's earned its location. And because Bram did his research well and other folks did go there and write about it, that's why Dracula takes place mostly there.
You've traveled incredible distances for your own research, like Scottish castles, climbing the extinct volcano in Transylvania. Can you tell us the most surprising or memorable discovery that you made during those adventures?
Probably it's easier for me, rather than choose one, I'll say somewhere in the top three was following the discovery by a friend of mine, Hans de Roos, who actually found sitting in plain sight the coordinates that Bram wrote in his notes, sitting in plain sight for like 30 years, but nobody put two and two together. And when de Roos looked at the coordinates and looked at a map, I looked at one of the maps that Bram actually used for his research, and we all triangulated stuff and realized this is the place, Mount Isvaro in northeastern Transylvania, near the Borgo Pass, near Bukovina, just as Bram says in the novel, but we just didn't put it all together. So I couldn't go when Hans went. So I went when my son was available, and I had a couple other friends, and we went in the middle of September, and it was probably appropriate to that we only had one day of our schedule that I could pigeonhole this into with all the other traveling going on. But it was a misty day. It was, had some rain was falling, not bad. When we got to the top of this thing after hiking up 2.5 hours, there was some far off thunder and lightning. And we were, I can't remember exactly how high, 6,000, 7,000 feet, something like that. It was, not huge, but it was pretty up there. No ropes, it was no trail, but bushwhacking. But when we got up there, we sort of had this moment of like, this is where Bram set the castle. This is where he had that final battle at the 47th parallel between Dracula and the gypsies, and this is the spot. And with that, the fog kind of closed in. But what was so cool was that we knew this, but we didn't see it. The fog lifted at the right time, and we realized this was an extinct volcano, but we could see the massive caldera and this yellow rocks, which was the sulfur mine down in the bottom, an old extinct sulfur mine. Well, we couldn't get down the same way we came up because it was raining, it was very slippery, and thunder and lightning were far off. But when you're up in the mountains, you don't mess around with that. And so we actually made our way, took us about an hour to get to a high mountain weather station. We seek refuge there. And sure enough, we got a guy to come and pick us up and bring us out. But when he drove up there, he didn't know who the heck we were. And he had brought some supplies for the high mountain weatherman who doesn't see many people. And he brought Palinka, which I know is the plum brandy in Romania.
Yes.
A block of this good cheese, a block of bread, and a block of this horrible smoked pork lard, which is a delicacy up there. And he says, yes, I'll take you back. But before we must drink, which, okay, that's like a cliche movie thing. But, we had to do some drinking. We had to do some eating. And once this guy figured out who we were.
Was it Palenka?
Yeah, and I don't like Palenka very much. I'm sorry. It's really, really rough on the throat. But, we had to. It would have been rude, right? So once this guy figured out who we were, and our guide and translator figured out who he was, he owned a bed and breakfast right on the edge of the national forest. And so he was like, oh, now I've saved the Stokers, and now we're going to have people come to my bed and breakfast so they can come to this mountain and see where the fictional castle Dracula is. He then helped me and my guys meet the people that ran the national park, and we erected a big, massive plaque on the rock face, not massive, about 2 foot by 2 foot, saying this is the location of Bram Stoker's fictional castle. So that's one of the most memorable things, because there was a little bit of danger involved. We got saved, but we've left, an appropriate marker. And I like to contribute to tourism in a positive way. I still encourage people to go to Bran Castle, where I'm going to be going with Maria Schmitz mysterious Transylvania tours, mysterious adventure tours, because that's the castle. Remember, I just told you where the internal castle was?
Mm-hmm.
The Grand Castle is the exterior of Bram's fictional castle. So in his 2 books that he found in the London Library, Bram actually saw 2 pictures of Bran Castle, and he used those pictures to describe the exterior. So he merged 2 castles together. So great for tourism. We got a Castle Dracula in Cruden Bay, Scotland. We got one in Bran, Transylvania. And now we got the real location where there's no castle, spoiler alert, on top of Mount Isboro, an extinct volcano. I know you got to take a break, but I'll just finish with this. On that note, when I found the typescript of Dracula in Seattle, Washington, owned by Paul Allen, the original ending of Dracula that was deleted, crossed out, was a volcanic eruption right after the Count was stabbed, proving that Bram planned to have the end of Dracula on a volcano with a volcanic eruption, but luckily it was taken out.
Oh, wow. So that's the 101 missing pages?
Part of them, yep.
Part of them. Before we get into the break, I want to ask another question. The influence of Bram's childhood seemed like it was kind of traumatic from what I've heard, like possible bloodletting and his mother's dark Irish folklore going on, stories of premature burials. Did this shape any of the Gothic horror that we see in today's Dracula?
Should I answer it now or after the break?
You can answer that now.
So, if you've read any Freud or any other psychologist, they're all going to say that things that happen to children, kind of stick with you. Vulnerable minds, some grow out of it. I think this really played a big role, that he was a sickly child for 7 years. There was 2 of his uncles were famous bloodletting doctors. He actually mentioned in Dracula how the Count looked like he was a leech, a bloated leech, fat with all the blood. We know stories his mother told him that she witnessed actually people being misdiagnosed and buried prematurely during the cholera epidemic. And one little quote that he wrote himself in a book that he wrote about Henry Irving, that he says, my childhood illness and the stories that I was told, weighed heavily on my mind, and they were fruitful according to their kind in later years. So yes, I do absolutely believe that this young child, this vulnerable child, developed a very dark sense of imagination during those first 7 years.
It's really interesting. When we get back, we'll discuss some more about Dracula and kind of the correlations between Bram Stoker and how this whole Dracula cult came about, I guess. So we're going to take a quick break, and then I'll pull you right back up. You're listening to the Gateway Podcast with special guest Dacre, great-grand-nephew of Bram Stoker, right here on 107.7 FM radio. If paranormal legends and locations keeps you up at night, you'll definitely want to check out Eerie Expeditions magazine, and here's more on that. I'm sorry, that is not the commercial, you guys. Someone messed up all the things.
Are you ready to explore the unknown? Dive into the world of the strange, mysterious, and unexplained with Eerie Expeditions magazine. Each issue is packed with spine-tingling tales, cutting-edge paranormal investigations, and exclusive insights into hauntings, cryptids, UFOs, and more. Whether you're a seasoned investigator or just love a good ghost story, Eerie Expeditions magazine has something for you. Join our growing community of truth seekers and adventure lovers. Subscribe today at EerieExpeditionsMagazine.com and unlock the secrets of the supernatural. Are you ready? That's EerieExpeditionsMagazine.com, where the extraordinary is just a click away. Dare to discover.
And welcome back to this episode of the Gateway Podcast. The latest issue of Eerie Expeditions magazine will hit the shelves this week, so stay tuned for that. Tonight we are talking with author Dacre Stoker. He is the author of he's author of a lot of books, actually. He's on the national bestsellers list, and He's here to talk about Dracula. Let me get him back on here. Dracula Files. Welcome back.
Hi there, I'm back.
Tell us about the recent discovery of Bram's research books in the London Library.
Yeah, so I got this email, a little while ago from the guy that was the head of fundraising at the London Library, Philip Spedding, and I was working with Robert Bisang on our book Dracula Annotated for the 125th anniversary, and he said, I think I found the books that Bram listed in the back of his notes in our library. So do you think you can help me verify them? So what this means is Bram Stoker's notes for Dracula were discovered in the 60s in Philadelphia in the Rosenbach Museum. And luckily, a few years ago, they were published by Robert Bisang and Elizabeth Miller. So you could buy Bram Stoker's notes for Dracula and see his exact handwriting. Luckily, it's transcribed on one side of the page, but he also listed, almost like a student, all of his resources, all the books he used. Now, we know he was a member of the London Library, but the London Library moved from the British Museum to St. James Square after World War II. And everything, kind of got shifted around and so on. So they lost all the records of who took what books out. They used to have the book, Crystal Thomas taking out this book, Dacre Stoker. They didn't have that. But what this guy found was he found the list of all the books in the back of Bram's notes. He walked around the library and found them on the shelves and pulled them out. Okay, so I got 30 books. Then he started looking through them and noticed strange little marks in the margins, pencil marks, checks, X's, underlined, NB, nota bene, lots of little strange symbols. So then he looked at the notes in the other book and, ooh, he's talking about Bran Castle. He's talking about the devil. He's talking about Munich. So what Philip Spedding was noticing was this correlation between Bram's notes, the reference book, and these marks. So he wanted to know from me, had I seen any of Bram's own books that had similar markings. Luckily, in my possession, I was borrowing for a year so I can analyze the heck out of this one, a first edition of Dracula, just like this one over my shoulder here, that Bram had marked up at his publisher's request to eliminate 30,000 words to make the first paperback edition of Dracula an abridged version. So his editor gave him a book, a first edition, write on it, chop it up, because they didn't have cut and paste in those days, obviously.
It sounds like an author's nightmare.
Yeah, but not only did he cut things out, but he had to make bridge words when he did take out sentences or paragraphs to reconnect things, and lots of little symbols. So what I had in my possession was Bram's handiwork, and luckily, Bram's son gave to the London Library 2 books of Bram's own books as a donation. So they had 2 other sources that had similar markings in them. So, nowadays there's no need to do it because we look at stuff online and we do strike through, we do highlight, authors do, notes on the side, all this. But in those days, pencil marks. So this was the verification process of what books Bram used. There was like 8 books all about religion, geography, maps, customs, superstitions, folklore, the way things looked, like descriptions of mountain passages. So that's why Bram got Romania so right without even going there. And it's so cool, back to these mysterious adventure tours that I'll be going on October 27th, November 4th. I take extracts with me. I put them on the computer and I write them, I print them off. And when we get to those same locations, I will read those to the people on the tour and say, hey guys, we're standing in this spot where Bram was looking at the Borgo Pass or looking at this castle or looking at this particular thing. This is what he got from Charles Bonner, Andrew Cross, Elizabeth Mattuccelli, and this is how it manifested itself. And then I'll read a little passage of Dracula. So I kind of connect the dots for folks with the real life place, how he learned about it, and how it made its way into the novel.
Oh, that's so interesting. Because one of the things about when you go over to Romania, everybody associates Dracula with Vlad Tapes. And so when they go to someplace like Bram Castle and realize that he never stepped foot in that castle, there's just this interesting web between Bram's side of Transylvania and then Dracul's side of Transylvania.
There is, and again, you get it. And I know people at the border, they laugh when they see me and I hand over my pass. Oh, Mr. Stoker, welcome back again. Have you brought more vampires with, I said, no, the vampires are here. He goes, no. So we get a kick out of it. But, sort of for the record, let's just say there's a lot of people really happy that this is driving tourism. And a lot of people make a good living doing it. But some people get tired of it because there's a whole lot more in Romania than there is vampires. Let's be honest. But their guy, Vlad Tepes. Let me just clear the record, and again, I go into much more detail on the tours, and we talk about this. We go to where Vlad Tepes was born. We go to Sighișoara. We go to Păunari, where he actually had a fortress. So Bram saw again in a book by William Wilkinson in Whitby, England, in that library, and another by James Samuelson in the London Library, 2 references to the name Dracula, meaning the devil. Now, we know it means devil or dragon, but Wilkinson didn't know that back in the day. But Samuelson also mentioned that this guy was such an atrocious sort of leader, very violent, and he held back the Turks. He did wonderful things for Romania, even though his methods were, pretty brutal. It was the times. That's what they did. But he was looked at as a hero because he saved Christian Europe, along with the help of the Carpathian Mountains and the small passes, from this massive invasion of the Ottomans coming all the way over the Black Sea, the Danube Delta, coming up over the mountains, and coming into taking over Christian Europe for 7.5 years. So he did, historically he did great things, but all Bram was interested in, or what caught his eye, was the name devil, was that Dracula meant devil. And I believe that when he was looking for his Count Dracula, he also had an image of Henry Irving, his boss, playing the role of Mephistopheles, this assistant to the devil. So he needed a devil on earth, a devil incarnate, a man called the devil with a great history that goes way back, and when you read chapters 2 and 3 and you see how Dracula refers to himself as warlike things, they're all the history of Dracula. So he simply was opportunistic with the name. He found a guy that fit the model, and he turned Vlad the Impaler into a Hollywood. Oh, he didn't do that. He turned him into a literary icon. Hollywood turned him into, with the help of Lugosi, Lee, Langella, and so on, into movie star.
It's just so perfect, how that all turned out, though. I mean, when you go into just off the record, I know this is off the topic. That I forget his name. It begins with an H. The guy who lived in Corvin Castle.
Hunyadi, John Hunyadi.
Yes. He's the one who they attribute the tolling of the bells now.
Yeah. So Hunyadi was just a quick. Transylvania, Hungary, Wallachia. There was all sorts of moving. Germany, Saxon. There was all sorts of moving of the boundaries on who was more powerful at the time. And their main concern was, holding off the Ottoman Empire. So these allegiances were always changing. There's movies you can watch on YouTube. You can watch Dracula Untold and get a Hollywood version of it. But Hunyadi was the family that built one of the most impressive castles, Corvin Castle, which we will be
visiting. You guys go to, yes.
Yep, very cool. And they've got a really cool torture chamber now, which all that kind of stuff did go on. And he did some interesting things, like they will do is, put bad guys down in a big hole in the ground, and very interesting architecture as well as archaeology, even being discovered to this day in that castle. I've got to know the managers very well, who are archaeologists, and every time I come, they say, "Oh, Dacre, we've got to show you a new secret. We've just found, we've cleaned off this wall, and we found some graffiti 500 years earlier than we thought of last week. So, but I'm not, Crystal, help me understand. What's the story of the bell tolling
So when that guy died, it's in connection with Christianity. They attribute him as winning a battle, and so when he died, they started ringing the bells at 12 o'clock noon every day. And so that's where that comes from. We still do it in the Christian world. We ring the bells at noon every day. If you have a church, I promise you, they're ringing the bell at 12 o'clock, and it's because of this guy.
Yeah, cool.
But anyhow, off topic. I'm really sorry.
No, that's cool, because I mean, it's nice to see things that we now know of the rest of the world started in Romania.
Yeah. The collaboration between Bram and his brother Thornley Stoker adds depth to the novel's medical accuracy. I'm always interested in the medical side of stuff. Can you elaborate how their partnership influenced the scientific elements and mental health themes in Dracula?
Oof, I could go on forever. Let me give a shameless plug. I use Thornley in one of my books, Dracul, as a main character, because the research that I did, Thornley was a very famous doctor, Bram's oldest brother, and I've seen his handwriting in the Dracula notes, and he explained to Bram, and he wrote all about it in Dracula for Bram, how to do blood transfusions. That was very new. There was no blood typing going on at the time. So all the transfusions between the band of heroes and Lucy was like a shot in the dark. And also the brain trephination surgery that Seward and Van Helsing had to do on Renfield. You know, when he got banged up in the head and had a brain bleed by Dracula, brain trephination. That's a surgery that Thornley did himself a couple of times back in the day, which was early. But one of the things that I've just recently dug into, which is why Renfield, why the mental health patient in Dracula, and this is, I believe, it is not written by Bram this way, but his mother gave a major paper in how to properly educate people who are deaf and mute, how to judge if somebody is criminally insane. So this was a paper she delivered to the Statistical and Social Inquiry Society in Dublin, Ireland. Very serious, all-male society, and she delivered the paper. Thornley Stoker himself not only was a physical doctor, but he also worked in mental health hospital. So I believe Renfield was inserted into the story as a way to show the sensitivities and the needs, but also the contributions that people with mental health problems could give if they're treated fairly and justly. Bram, I know, went to do his research for Dracula at Millbank Prison, and he interviewed prisoners there. Now, back in those days, many mental health people were thrown into prisons. It was just the beginning of what they called the Asylum Act, when asylums were created to better treat people who had mental health problems. Hence, Dr. Seward and his asylum, treating Renfield. So this was a social statement by the Stoker brothers to say, this is what we need to do. Furthermore, Thornley was an inspector of vivisection, which is the experimentation on the brains of live animals for the cause of education. So what would happen is a monkey or a dog were strapped down, the skull taken off live. The doctor would poke and prod into the brain. Parts of the dog or the monkey would move, and all the students would go, ooh, 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 that's cool. Now we learn stuff. But those dogs were not always killed, euthanized properly. Sometimes they were just left to live and they'd die of infection. They would be left to live so they could observe them more. And this was happening more and more and more. And a lot of doctors were saying, wait a sec, this is far too cruel. We're going too far. So Thornley Stoker became an inspector of that to give licenses to people that only had the right to do it and did it properly and used proper euthanization. If you look carefully at how Seward and Van Helsing refer to Count Dracula, he's referred to as an evil scientist doing unnecessary experimentation. On who? The mental patient Renfield, by having him eating bugs and animals. And there's even a part in the novel where Seward says, ooh, I'd love to do experimentation on him, Renfield, if only it was deemed necessary. So it's this little undertone Bram slips in here because of his brother and his own sensitivities to proper treatment, ethical treatment of people with mental health issues. So that's the type of guy Bram was, and that's why many people read this story numerous times, because you don't pick that up the first time or the second time.
I certainly didn't pick that up.
Yeah. So again, a shameless plug here. Check out my Dracula 125th annotated for the 125th anniversary with Robert Bisang, who's no longer living, but we actually include into the story over 1,000 footnotes of things like that. But also we put in that deleted ending I said in the first half of the show, and we put in the notes that were included in the first 3 chapters that were taken out of the story.
I don't know if this is a dumb question or not, but is there any correlation between vampires drinking blood and the bloodletting?
There very well could be.
Or is it all tapes?
Well, it's hard. I mean, it's hard to prove because Bram doesn't say it out. He doesn't say, "Oh, I have the blood is the life," right? The blood is the life. Anytime somebody loses blood, they lose life. So it makes sense if somebody's reanimated, they've got to get live blood back in. So that's why the whole idea of the vampire being a body that spirit comes out of the grave in some form or another and then goes to a living person, and this person then is looked at as losing blood. Sometimes it's tuberculosis because they cough up blood. Sometimes they're anemic. Sometimes they actually die, and they go look at the offending suspected vampire and see that the body is bloated and their cheeks are awful. They don't understand about the gases that go along with decomposition. Sometimes around the shroud is red marks, again, biological decomposition. So they find this when they exhume a grave. So they assume that this body that was dead looks like it has now fresh blood in it. It must have got it from so-and-so who's now got less blood in them and is now dead. So that's where a lot of the blood sucking comes from. They must have taken the life out of that guy or that girl, and now they're back to living again. So Bram's own bloodletting, that he was subjected to, it's not written down, but I believe it was when he had his mysterious 7-year illness. I think he got to see these leeches sucking blood out of him, taking his life out. They didn't know at the time what they were doing. They thought they were taking the bad blood as well as the good. But, a lot of people did survive, so it must have worked. So it kept on going for, 100 years.
It's so interesting. So Romania, there's so much to see. And I know you guys have this incredible tour that you're going over there again. I'm so jealous because I can't go. But you guys are actually having a party and everything.
Oh, I got to tell you, Ria Schmidt has really pulled it all out. It's not just any party. This is actually a party inside Brand Castle. Now, I've been to parties outside Brand Castle when they have a really cool tent and band and like 500 people. And I've been inside the place, but never have been inside for a private party of only 100 people, the whole castle to ourselves from 6 o'clock p.m. till 2 in the morning, DJ, dancing. We've also got some really cool entertainment, live entertainment, kind of telling the story through actors and so on. And I can't say it yet because there's a reveal coming, Crystal. There's a reveal coming that there is an activity that I've created along with some of my vampire creatives that we're going to be premiering in the castle. And it's going to take about an hour and a half to do, and it's way cool. But Maria said, Dacre, don't tell anybody about it until.
Man, they can't know.
Not yet. But it's very cool. We've got a reveal coming up in about a week, so it'll be worth it. But yeah, it's going to be a neat party. So you got the 12 days of the whole tour and the party, Brand Castle, Corvin Castle. We go to Plenary Fortress. We got these cool witches doing this really cool ritual. all sorts of neat places to go visit. And again, along the way, I give these audiovisual presentations on screens. I tell the stories. I bring the readings. So it's going to be a great time. Too bad you can't come this time.
I know. I so wish I could go. I so wish I would totally go again. I am planning on taking a solo trip back to Romania.
I know. I got to help you meet some of my friends over there because they'll take you some cool
You're going to help
places.
me with this trip for sure.
I know.
One of the things about Bram Stoker, vampires aside, there is, when I was there, it was at nighttime, and me and some of the travelers walked down to, at the bottom of the hill. The castle is up on the hill. It was a full moon that night, so talk about ambience. There was a big full moon, and we went to that cavern where that heart is in the wall. That grotto.
Yeah.
Yes. People always forget about that. For listeners out there, there is an actual human heart that is buried in the grotto. I forget why though. It's the queen's heart, right?
Well, I've got a feeling now. I hate to burst the bubble.
Oh,
It
no.
was there. I think it's been moved. So she was the queen that lived in this. She was a granddaughter of Queen Victoria. She lived in this castle. She loved the castle. She was an incredible, benevolent lady. She did all sorts of wonderful things for people, soldiers in the war. And her heart was with this place. And so she asked for her heart to be put in this place. And for some reason, and it might have had to do something with the communist takeover of the castle for 50 years, and it was saved in this like cool little vault in a park just behind the castle. And when I was there just recently, it said no, it's moved into a safer place where there's better security.
Oh, it is kind of off. I can see that.
I mean, somebody wanted to break in and rip it off, so I've got a feeling I wish I don't want to tell you the wrong place, but I'm pretty sure it's not there now, but it's in a safe place, put it that way.
It's interesting. Well, it's still an interesting area, and if you're taking a trip, I highly recommend going down there and take a little EVP recorder because it's very haunted in that little area too.
Yeah. There's definitely. I mean, just because the heart's not there doesn't mean the spirit's not there.
Right. And it's what you'll find is, like you said, you get a lot of war soldiers speaking in German and stuff around that area. We got a lot of EVPs in German that night, which is interesting. So, but Romania has so much more going on than just vampires. You have the Romani witches that really adds a whole nother layer of mystery. And you guys are going to explore some of that as well.
Yes, absolutely. Interesting villages. We're going to have, meals with families. So you really get to know the people, not just the touristy things. And I highly recommend, if you can't make this trip, get there some other time and go into these little towns and just wander. Like Viskri is this beautiful little town. It's now, I won't say unfortunately, but then Prince Charles, now King Charles, is very interested in the biodiversity in the country, and also in sustainable tourism. So he's purchased a couple of these really cool old Saxon homes, refurbished them, and have them for rent. I don't know if it's VRBO or Airbnb, but he wants to prove that tourism can work. You wander around and you go into these fortified churches, these churches that have massive walls and towers that were built essentially to sustain sieges during the Ottomans venturing into Transylvania or Wallachia, Moldavia, Bukovina, all this area. They've got these wonderful churches that are fortified. And when you walk in there, you can just feel the spirits of people who were seeking refuge while there was a time of, war going on around them. And this is where they went and hung out. And obviously it's turbulent times and people would die and there would be attacks. And so, there's a lot of connections people can make.
Oh, Romania, I just love it. I remember when I stayed in that little village, or we visited for dinner, but there was one thing I noticed about it was the people had carved sigils into the framework on the buildings. I don't know what they meant. It was some kind of protection against. They're very superstitious, so it was some kind of sigil work.
Yeah,
For that.
lot of symbols. Garlic hanging here,
Mhm.
crosses hanging here. It's sort of cool to see traditional religion and pagan kind of rituals all intertwined, and everybody's cool with it. It's not bad. And anything that makes you feel good, that protects you, all
Yeah,
good.
and it's interesting when you get up into the mountain areas, the smaller villages. It's true, a lot of people won't even go out at night because of their superstitions and stuff.
Well, you gotta realize this, and when you look back, bad things happen in the dark, right? Why? Because there's no street lights. You can't just flick on man-made light and floodlight everything so you can see everything, right? Lights go down. You might have a torch, you might have something in your house, a fireplace. So what happens? Creatures of the night come out, and we only think the worst. And you think of the noises they make, wolves and owls and rats. And, yes, some of those things do bring rabies, and they bring disease, and they will eat your cattle. Or so the imagination tends to run wild when you're not in a sterile environment, or bright light just gets rid of all the possibilities. So do yourself a favor, go to a place, walk outside, sit outside and just listen and soak it all up. And if you need to have a flashlight or a crucifix with you, that's cool.
Symbolic.
Yeah.
Well, Dacre, thank you so much for joining me on the show. I can't believe how fast this hour went.
I know.
Incredible.
It's like just like when you and I chat on the phone about things, it goes. But it's because we've got such similar thoughts, and we both feel very similar about Romania. So, thank you, Crystal, for doing this. And I guess we'll be able to put some publicity up for this tour, or some of the other things that are happening. I'm doing a webinar next Tuesday, a week today, where I'm actually going through some of the same stuff we're talking today with audiovisual slides, Bram's notes, stuff like that, giving away some and actually giving away some tickets to the actual party that we just talked about. And I'm giving away one of these Bram Stoker bobbleheads. Where is he? All right, there he is. Giving away Bram Stoker bobblehead on Tuesday the 19th. So yeah, tune in and check us out. In the meantime, stay spooky. And Chris, I hope you and I can meet in Transylvania one day.
Oh, we will, definitely. Real quick though, where can people buy your book?
So, it's easy to say. Amazon, you can get all the books. I also sell them out of bramstokerestate.com, which is a website my wife and I run. Those are books probably the same price as Amazon, but I sign them and I'll ship them. But I got to charge for shipping. Amazon does. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's true. So what I'll do is send me those links on where people can sign up for both the tour and the party and the thing that you're doing this week.
Yeah, I'll get those tomorrow morning from Maria, and that'll give you the whole rundown on what's happening in the next couple of weeks with this stuff. And look, I know she really appreciates you pushing this stuff. She's a big fan of yours as well.
Well, thank you so much for joining me tonight. I really appreciate it.
All right, take care. Stay spooky, everyone.
Thank you guys for listening. You've been listening to The Gateway, broadcast from the edge of the Mojave, where the strange slips through the cracks. Live from United Public Radio Network, 107.7 FM, New Orleans. That was my guest tonight. His name is Dacre. Dacre. It's Dacre, Dacre. A lot of people always say Dacre. I hear that a lot. It's Dacre. But he's the great-grandnephew of Bram Stoker. Thank you all for listening. And if you guys want to join this party, I'm going to post all the links under the show. Or you know what? I'll just put it in a separate post. So stay tuned for that. And also, Eerie Expeditions magazine. That's coming out this week. Stay tuned. Thank you all again.